We're here to investigate the case of the final country with the simple question, when does a crime become a conspiracy?
Becca, are you packed yet?
That's Leia. This is The Flat Circle, a True Detective after show. Welcome to The Flat Circle, a True Detective after show. My name is Chris Ryan.
I'm Jason Concepcion.
And we are here to talk about episode 7, the penultimate episode of the third season of True Detective. The episode is called The Final Country, and I would bet my life that it is a reference to this James Crumley novel. James Crumley, one of the great crime fiction writers of the post-World War II era in America. You read one page of James Crumley, you know absolutely that he's been an influence on Nick Pizzolatto, so I bet that is a tip of the cap to him. As always, we're going to go through the who, what, when, where, and why of this case as we get closer and closer to some sort of conclusion. Let's start with the what.
Lots of what. So what did we learn? Start in 1990. Wayne goes up to the drinking tower at the Devil's Den, where he finds Roland already there, sitting beside the body of Tom Purcell. One shoe has been kicked off and is several flights below, bullet hole in his head, a gun, and a typewritten suicide note nearby. Love to typewrite a suicide note.
Which is sort of Wayne's point, is like, you think this guy in this moment of distress sits down, right, changes the ribbon.
Tab. Like,
ding! Yeah.
Amelia visits Margaret at her home where she's got a little craft shop going.
Yeah.
So it's like normal stuff.
Yeah.
She is making a wreath for Tom, who has passed away now.
Right.
Doesn't understand why he'd kill himself now. Amelia asks if Lucy ever knew a black man with one eye, and Margaret says no, she knew a lot of men, but not a man like that. And Amelia tells Margaret about the theory that that man gave Julie a doll on Halloween. And Margaret says, Halloween, wait a second. And she gets a photo and shows Amelia the photo that we've been talking about, clear photo of the Purcell kids in front of Margaret's house, two ghosts in the background.
Right, and that's going to essentially be one of the main questions that we have in the last episode is who are those ghosts? Because they were clearly the mechanism through which those kids got abducted.
Yes. Margaret, after a little bit of a fight, relents to allow Amelia to borrow the photograph.
I also would just say really quickly about Margaret, if you got a second.
Sure. Please.
You know, Amelia's investigating this case just like Wayne is, just like the lawyers for Woodard are, just like Eliza is. So she's pretty familiar with the ins and outs of the case by this point. And she goes into Margaret's house and she finds herself basically in a pagan craft store. And there's just wreaths and mannequins and what looks like a fair amount of dolls. But in 1980, it was like, dolls, man. I don't know.
I know.
Who's got dolls?
She's about 20 years too early for Etsy.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a normal vibe
Probably
going on in
like one of
Margaret's
those
house.
early eBay stores where it would just be like one thing on a shelf.
Yeah, we're just making wreaths,
Yeah.
as one does.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. With the case now essentially closed, Wayne is packing up when he receives Lucy Purcell's Nevada phone records. This is gangbusters stuff. They indicate that Lucy called a number, which turns out to be Harris James' private line at Hoyt Foods, several times before her death. And that following this, James flew to Nevada right before Lucy died, and then flew back the day after her death.
Right.
Obviously, this is huge. Amelia goes to the bar that Lucy used to work at and discovers that her cousin Dan, Lucy's cousin Dan, was seen there talking to a one-eyed man. Wayne shows Roland the phone evidence and convinces him that they need to interrogate Harris James at the famous
interrogation barn.
The interrogation barn until he cracks.
Which he does.
Yeah, Roland is like, this is a really bad idea. It turns out to be quite a bad idea because Harris breaks free. He struggles for Wayne's gun, and in that struggle is killed. Wayne and Roland bury his body. Wayne goes home, burns his clothes. The next day, which, by the way, Amelia sees and is like, what you doing?
Yeah, just normal husband burning clothes in an oil drum stuff.
Man, what a great relationship to be able to be like, let's talk about this tomorrow. And Amelia to be like, okay.
Yeah.
So they do briefly talk about it the next day, but then that conversation is interrupted by the phone ringing. And who should it be but our good pal, who we have yet to see, Hoyt.
The big bad.
The big bad. We're hearing his voice for the first time. He is outside the home. He mentions Wayne and Amelia's children by name. And he says, we can either talk about this inside, or you can come out and talk to me out here.
So I just want to say one thing about the 1990s stuff.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this, the ambiguity of certain characters and their intentions over the course of the season. And I thought that was really on display again in this episode, where we still don't know what the black man with one eye, was he a procurer or was he a protector?
Right.
If that's the same guy who shows up at the reading, why is he so interested in where Julie has gone, seemingly in an almost paternal way?
Right.
Or is he like, I need to silence her?
And so aggrieved by the idea that someone would try to write a book about this in a way that doesn't intimate guilt in a crime?
Yeah, it's like you're almost mad that yet another person is sort of profiting or taking something from Julie Purcell. So I just think that, like, even as we hit this last episode, you know, I still don't know what's up with Amelia. I still don't know what's up with Eliza. I still don't know what's up with Margaret, with the one-eyed black man. To some extent, I don't understand if we've gotten the full picture on Roland yet. We're still kind of like in this gray area with a lot of characters.
So much downloading left to do.
Yeah.
Now we enter a timeline that we have not yet seen. 2005, we assume. I'm just putting a question mark by that because
it's about when Becca would go to college.
About when she would go to college. Wayne is taking Becca to college, and this is our first look at Becca as an adult and our first foray into this timeline out of the original three. Her father is helping her move her stuff, and they seem to have a great relationship at this time. So what went wrong? What happened? We'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like she mentions not wanting to go to college, but she feels like she needs to. Again, ambiguity. That could be something that any college freshman says, but it also could signify or suggest that something has happened in the the Hayes' lives that would make her a little bit hesitant to leave behind her father.
Yes.
Crucially, though, Amelia is not there.
We spend the bulk of this episode in 1990 and 2015. So in the 2015 timeline, there's a lot of interviews with Eliza. Eliza asks about Tom, and if Wayne ever doubted that Tom's death was a suicide. Wayne denies this. He denies a lot of the stuff that Eliza asks about, even though she seems to be really right on the right track. She brings up inconsistencies with the original ME report, noting that there was an indication that there was a contusion on the back of Tom's skull, and Wayne is like, well, you know, his skull was blown apart. You couldn't really tell anything about that. And then are you implying that somebody knocked him out and then carried him up the steps?
Right.
Which, by the way, the shoe would kind of seem to indicate that. Anyway, Eliza notes that Tom's death ended the 1990 investigation, just as Woodard's violent confrontation ended the 1980
Authorities always looking for a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence to say, okay, we're done. Okay, we're done. We're going to put this all away.
Roland arrives while Wayne is being interviewed by Eliza. Eliza asks Wayne if Amelia herself ever thought there was a wider conspiracy behind the Purcell case. Again, Wayne says he doesn't think so, though our flashbacks indicate that this is not the case. He then asks Eliza, well, do you know anything about
evidence?
Do you have any evidence of that?
Yeah.
Eliza plays the video of the AG announcing Tom's suicide. The AG concludes that Tom is the guilty party in the case, and that after being confronted with the phone call evidence, he, racked by guilt, committed suicide. Eliza asks if Wayne is okay with these conclusions, and he says no, he's never been satisfied with any part of this case. Then Eliza brings up the one-eyed man, saying he might be named Watts, and she has a theory that this man was the procurer, as we've been saying.
Right.
And she delves into her theory that the Purcell case is part of a larger shadow network of criminality spanning the country. She shows Wayne the crooked spirals, says they're symbols of pedophile groups that they used to signal one another.
And she had mentioned the crooked spiral earlier in the season as well.
Pulls up a newspaper story covering Marty and Russ' 2012 case in which they killed Errol, the serial killer. But notes that though Marty and Russ' case indicated a wider conspiracy, none of that none of that part of the case was ever broken open.
And she shows a bunch of the dolls that like she's found that are symbols of pedophilia in the underground.
And she notes also that part of her theory is that the Purcell parents sold their kids, perhaps with the help of Dan O'Brien, to some group, just as Marty and Rust were involved with.
Right.
Wayne and Roland visit the Hoyt's former housekeeper. They ask about Harris James. They learn that Hoyt's daughter, Isabel, that her husband and daughter died in a wreck, and that after this, she never left the estate.
This is a pretty common trope in crime novels, so for the viewer who maybe doesn't read a ton of crime fiction, that might seem sort of convenient when the housekeeper shows up,
right,
and they're talking about, like, she seems to have this wealth of previously unheard knowledge, but like read Raymond Chandler, read James Elroy, there's always a person like 2/3 or towards the last eighth of the book who pops up and is like, I have all the answers. It might seem overly convenient, but it's generally what you have to do when you have so many different threads going. You need somebody to pull them all together.
This conversation is really fascinating. So we learned that she lived in like a basement area or an area that was separate from the house.
Isabel does.
Isabel did. And that she then got into a car accident, perhaps after escaping the pink rooms, and that post-1981, security at the residence was notably increased. And this involved a man named Mr. June, a black man with one eye who did not mix with the rest of the household staff.
You would naturally connect Mr. June as Mr. Watts, as Watts, who is also the person who showed up at Amelia's reading. Like we're assuming that's the same character.
Also, as you noted to me over text last night,
yes,
Mr. June, Mary July,
right,
something there.
And the idea of basically, if Mr. June is known as Mr. June inside of the Hoyt household in the mansion and this compound, and Julie Purcell, let's just say, was in that pink room because obviously Tom comes into that room,
sees something that indicates,
and sees something that says Julie.
Right.
If she's living there, this might be basically a fantasy world created down there.
Yes.
By Isabel or Mr. Hoyt or whoever, in which a man named Mr. June brings a secret princess named Mary July. And we were still trying to sort of figure out the significance of the month being the last name there, but it's worth noting.
Fascinating implications there also, when you think about Julie's line in the phone call, the man pretending to be my father, and who was on camera at the time.
Right, there were three guys.
When Julie's saying that.
Right, there was Tom and the two lawyers.
Right. So Wayne and Roland are burning the midnight oil at Wayne's house. They're going through Amelia's stuff and the case files. And while discussing the case, Wayne sees the car again idling outside. He goes out. Some real Hardy Boys action here. Confronts the car, bat in hand, but that's just a distraction so Roland can take a snap of the license plate. And afterwards, Wayne goes into a fugue state again, his memories collapse, and he sees himself burning his clothes after the Harris James abduction and murder in 1990.
So let's just do a little bit of who, we don't have to belabor it. I mean, we talked about Becca already. Isabel, I think, is a really fascinating character that seems pulled from like, Rebecca or something. It's this sort of woman wandering this house. She's isolated, she's emotionally disturbed. She's had trauma in her life with the death of her husband and her child. I thought that it was pretty interesting and worth noting that we mentioned earlier the similarities between the Hoyts and the Tyson family.
Yeah.
And Tyson being this huge employer in Arkansas, obviously a huge food poultry producer. In the Tyson family, John W. Tyson was killed in a train accident in the 1960s, and then his grandson, also named John, took over the company eventually. I just thought it was really interesting that they've got this company in the fictional world of Arkansas that has some mirror images. Obviously, we're not saying that there's anything close to what's happening with the Hoyts, with the Tysons, but Nick Pizzolatto is always drawing from real life to kind of inform his fictional universe. And I also just want to talk a little bit about Eliza. So I kind of felt like early on in the season that Eliza was a storytelling mechanism.
Right.
That she was just there the same way the two other cops in season one who were interviewing Rust and Marty are kind of there to bring about like a narrative. There's like, tell me more, tell me about this, tell me about that. But they're not actually in the story. They're not characters. But as the season's gone on, Eliza's role has gotten more significant. We know now that she's in some kind of relationship with Henry.
Right.
Wayne's son. I'm curious about whether or not that relationship developed before or after they started this process.
As am I. That part of it is fascinating.
Did Henry get approached by her and she was like, I want to do something about your dad, and then they became romantically entangled in that part? Were they already romantically entangled and then Eliza was like, by the way, can I do something about your dad? I just think it speaks to her motivations. And the way that they're kind of depicting Eliza is kind of borderline, like, you know, like she'd be like on Serial. You know what I mean? Like she's investigating true crime.
Right, an amateur, but a rigorous amateur.
Yeah.
Hewing to some kind of, not to say journalistic, but journalistic standards.
She's on camera, and you get the feeling like this is some sort of like 48 hours, it would be on cable, like kind of thing. The thing that is confusing to me about that is that, Eliza seems to have like a ton of sources.
Yeah,
this is something that's been investigated by state of Arkansas and the state police twice, in 1980 and 1990. And Eliza has person after person who she claims are witnesses say. She knows about Watts. They couldn't find that guy the whole time they were investigating in 1980 and 1990.
And how hard could it be to find him is the other thing.
Right. She seems to have follow-up medical reports, like follow-up coroner reports on Tom's body. She seems to have she has the photos of Dan O'Brien in the quarry, the skeleton.
She knows all about the mysterious plainclothes policeman who we now assume to be Harris James, doing questions, questioning witnesses after the fact to try and find out what people know.
So she's got all this information. Is she getting it from Henry?
Yeah.
Is she getting it on her own? And does she have some sort of motivation? Like, where does she want this to go? She says she's disappointed when she sort of presents this conspiracy idea that the Purcell abduction and murder is somehow related to everything that happened in Louisiana years before. She seems disappointed that Wayne doesn't see the connections.
He's not unwilling to jump at this material.
But she brings up another scandal, another conspiracy, and I think it's pretty telling that she does so. She mentions Nebraska. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what real-life crimes could have been influencing the show. That would probably have to be the Franklin County scandal, which was this infamous scandal that took place in Nebraska in the late 80s. It rocked this Nebraska town, and it was essentially, it stemmed from an investigation into a failing savings and loan. And this was a savings and loan that was supposed to service like more or less like underprivileged parts of the Nebraska community. And it was a pretty modest S&L, but when an investigation took place, they found a ton of off-book money missing. And then there was essentially this wildfire of conspiracy that suggested that this money was being used to fund essentially a child prostitution ring that also had hints of devil worship and drug smuggling. And if you can think of a nationally prominent politician in the late 80s, their name probably came up in the Franklin County scandal, but it was
George W. Bush.
By and large considered
to
be a hoax.
Right. When the smoke all cleared, what remained was nothing.
Yeah, people were charged with perjury.
Yeah.
The origins of the story seemed to come from somebody who had like a professional grievance with some of the savings and loan people. There was maybe some malfeasance on the part of the savings and loan, but like this wider conspiracy was proven to be a hoax or thought to be a hoax. The fact that Eliza is kind of kicking that can down the road as like, this is also, like, this is real.
Yeah.
There's two ways to read that. It's Pizzolatto using this as like a way in which to give texture to the crimes in season 1 and season 3, or it's kind of Eliza basically being a little bit of a quack.
Yeah, it's like, where on the scale of Serial and InfoWars does Eliza fall?
Now,
and if her supposition is that the Franklin County scandal is legit, then she trends towards InfoWars quack.
Yeah, and I think her suggestion is basically that stuff like this happens, it involves really powerful people, and it gets shut down. I buy that.
Right.
And this is just fiction anyways, it doesn't matter what I buy, but I get what she's saying as a character, but I'm very curious as to whether or not we're gonna find out something in episode 8 about Eliza's motivations or background that we didn't know already. So that kind of brings us to conspiracy theories,
my favorite part.
to connections to season 1, to the larger True Detective universe. And I want to bounce one off of you really quickly.
Yes, give it to me. I love this one.
So the last scene set in 2015 of the episode before we get the Hoyt caravan coming up outside the house is West and Hayes go out to investigate this sedan that's been idling outside of Wayne's house that he claims to have seen usually at a point where he's in one of his fugue states.
Right. Late at night, working too hard, and this happens.
And the first time Roland didn't see it.
He did not see it.
This time they go outside to investigate, and the car drives off. Roland has taken a picture of the license plate. They're walking down this road, and basically the next thing you know, Wayne is in an abyss of his own memory. He's walking in on his 1990s self. The fire's burning in his backyard. He sees himself with his top off, like burning his clothing. So that scene is shot in a very particular way, but basically,
really
I'm not trying to get all sixth sense, but do you think Roland exists?
I do think he exists because we've seen stuff from his perspective.
And he's talked to people in 2015
and he's talked
outside
to,
of
yes, he's talked to other people. We went to his house, saw him with his dogs way before Henry and Wayne showed up. So there's a lot of material separate from Wayne that would heavily suggest that Roland exists outside of Wayne's thoughts.
If it wasn't for that Henry conversation,
yeah,
I would kind of be. We don't know what happens to Roland between 1990 and 2015.
No idea.
That the only exception, I think, in 2015. I mean, he's along for the ride with Wayne. Obviously, they go talk to the housekeeper. I'm not saying that this is like a kind of waterproof idea here, but there is something about Roland where he's like this spectral Dr. Watson helping Sherlock Holmes going through Alzheimer's.
Another kind of jumping off that theory is another theory that's been out on Reddit that I really like, is that Wayne at times is testing Roland.
Yeah.
Like so that time when they're working late at night and Wayne says he sees the car, but Roland doesn't see it. The supposition there is that Wayne, understanding that his memory's failing and that people could take advantage of him very easily because of this, is testing to see if Roland will tell him the truth by saying, there's a car out there, do you see it? And then by Roland answering truthfully, saying, no, I don't see it out there, he knows that Roland, at least in this instance, is not trying to pull one on him.
Right.
Is not part of the conspiracy, because again, these guys haven't seen each other in 20 years.
Right. I mean, I think that there's validity to both theories. And I think that Wayne's like hyper-awareness that he at various points in the day and a week may have more or less control over his mind. But I still just, this is the kind of crucial image, right?
Yeah.
Where is this happening? Is this inside of Wayne's mind, or is this on a street outside of Fayetteville?
I mean, we have no idea what, they go out, they confront the car, and then what?
Yeah.
Does he go back inside? We don't know. It just goes blank. And this is, obviously, Pizzolatto and Saulnier are trying to create this feeling in us where, we're as confused as Wayne is.
Yeah.
We don't understand sometimes where one moment leads to the next. There are gaps in our knowledge, gaps that are just completely missing. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating idea to think about how much of Roland is Roland. We've
been getting a bunch of tweets from viewers and listeners, and we really appreciate you guys engaging in all this with us. We just wanted to shout out two that we got in the last few days. Joe Day tweeted at us and said he was rewatching season 1, and in the first episode, the mother of one of the missing girls, Marie Fontenot, was last seen in Las Vegas, just like Lucy Purcell is in season 3. There's no way that's a coincidence. It would be really interesting if this is a connection to season 1, if there is this sort of 5 horsemen theory of multiple rich cabals of rich men running these child prostitution and abduction rings with pseudo-pagan religious imagery involved in that. If Vegas is some sort of clearinghouse for some of it, which would make sense if you've ever been to Vegas too, I guess.
I mean, I like calling back on Errol and the fact that we never go back, we never we never crack Billy Lee Tuttle. We never connect him to anything that's going on, although we think that he's tied to it, or it's heavily suggested that he is. You know, I kind of like this idea that these like rich and powerful men use this imagery to kind of like dupe these people that they use as their procurers or, you know, the handlers, to get them to do this stuff, to get them to buy into like this wider philosophy that either exists or it doesn't. Who knows? But it's pretty fascinating.
John Barber also tweeted us and said that he was watching True Detective Season 2, which is largely unremarked upon on this show.
Shouts to you.
True Detective canon. But shout out to John Barber because he mentioned that Annie Bezzerides' character, who's played by Rachel McAdams in Season 2, she talks about being abducted and taken into the woods by a strange man when she was a child. And I believe that her description of this scenario is she was taken out into the woods is similar to where they find Will. Now, I don't believe Annie was from Arkansas, but in terms of matching the pathology of these crimes, there's a lot of characters in the entire True Detective canon who go through very similar experiences, whether it's being abused as a child or losing a child in the case of Russ Cole, or, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that there's like a consistency to it. I would just say my favorite Reddit theory right now, before we get to any lingering questions that we have about the season finale, my favorite Reddit theory is the Hoyt Purcell connection theory, which is essentially that Julie is actually a secret princess, that she is the Hoyt heir. And that we kind of assumed that maybe Dan O'Brien was the secret father of Julie, that Lucy and Dan had basically had shared milestones. But what if Lucy slept with Hoyt while Tom was away, and Julie is actually Hoyt's daughter, and that she is pretty much the unofficial heir to the Hoyt fortune and to all of that. Like, that would give a huge twist and also kind of explain why this is so repeatedly being silenced over the years.
Man, Hoyt, interesting.
What if Hoyt's just like a totally normal guy?
That's,
you know, like.
I mean, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out, like, is there, listen, this involves a murder and a child abduction, but is there a world where their motivations for this are whatever the pure versions of motivations for doing something like this?
It's such a weird balance because, like, there's still, like, a school of thought out there that basically suggests, like, Amelia is in some way wildly, like, very responsible for a lot of what happened in 1980. And, you know, you can go back to the Jungle Book scene where Amelia is reading the story to her kids, and there's, like, resonance from the story, the Kipling story to the story that we're reading now, and that she could somehow have a role in this. But it's essentially, we've got one episode left, and I'm still kind of guessing as to what's happening. Let's talk about some of our other lingering questions.
I want to throw out one more theory. Two more theories, one of mine and one on Reddit. So there's another one that Mike Ardoin, you know, working as a landscaper now and has been hired by these numerous places, including the charity that Hoyt uses as a front, and there encountered Julie and helped her break out.
His childhood
He's
friend.
the one who helped her escape.
Yeah. There can only be so many bad guys, right? Like, somebody has to do something good.
Right. And then another one, you know, so we go to 2005, we assume, for the first time, and we see that, you know, Wayne is pretty sharp at this time. It's only 10 years before, or roughly a decade before the 2015 timeline. He and Becca seem to have a really good relationship. So what happened? And why is everybody like, she's in LA and wants to just like avoid this topic? What if Wayne, he seems very fixated on driving her somewhere. What if while he's driving her somewhere, he gets into an accident, she dies, he gets some kind of head injury, and this is what exacerbates his current
So there could be an element to it that is like everybody around Wayne not saying the thing that Wayne did.
Right.
Because Roland was like, you have to apologize to me.
Right.
You don't even know what you're saying sorry for. Henry seems pretty aggrieved towards Wayne.
Every time he brings up Becca, he's, you know, doesn't
something
want to
happens
talk
between
about it.
05 and 2015 for sure.
So, you know, what if it's something like that? That's all.
I have a few lingering questions as we head into this season finale. I really want to know who the white guy was in the office during Wayne's Vietnam vision.
Right.
You had all those NVA soldiers. There's some theories, oh, that's Harris James, or that's this guy who got shot at Woodard. It doesn't look like either of those characters.
It does not look like the same actor.
Yeah. So
but it has to be Harris James, does it not?
I guess so, but I thought that the people in that office are people that Wayne has killed.
Personally killed. And also, as you noted, he apologizes to that guy. And
so why would you apologize to Harris James? What role does Margaret have in all of this? I don't feel like she could have just accidentally been next to Lucy the entire series, and then at the end being like, "I'm just making wreaths, peace."
My thoughts on her shifted just a little because she gave the photo up and didn't seem as if she was aware of some kind of dark conspiracy.
And she's like, somebody has to stay here to remember.
Yeah.
Which is a huge theme in the series season, is just memory in general. So she seems like she's doing, but is that like doing penance for something? Why is Eliza on this case for true criminal? What does she want out of it? We talked about that. Who is the aunt?
Yeah, this is a great
that
one.
Julie tells friends about early in the season. Was this Isabel? Was there some sort of contact before Halloween?
Yeah.
Isabel is this aunt that she's going to see that they're like, she did not have an aunt, so she was basically already getting information there. Who were the ghosts on Halloween? Was that Isabel and Mr. June?
I'm gonna go say that that's a yes.
Okay.
We'll find out that that's a yes.
And we still really know what happened to Will.
Why kill Will?
Why, if it's an accident, why pose him?
Right.
And if it's like a ritual killing, what's up with that? You know what I mean? Like, not to put too fine a point on it, but just like, if Will's death was Will's death necessary to this, or was it kind of collateral damage?
And why not take them both? And then who like in Hoyt Foods' conspiracy shadow empire is playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Can you imagine, like, they go to, like, the staff meeting in the morning and it's just like,
okay, listen, you gotta be the
a couple more finger injuries on the chicken kill line.
Yeah.
Also, just a general question, any of you guys play D&D?
Yeah.
Could make a couple extra bucks.
Any Dungeon Masters out there?
We will be back. We will be live after the season finale, like really live. You guys can interact with us while we're on. We'll be on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook.
Can't wait.
Reacting to the season finale, which promises to be absolutely mind-boggling.
A lot to pack into it.
Yes, it is Oscar night. We will be far from the shallow as well. For Jason Concepcion, I am Chris Ryan. This has been The Flat Circle. See you next week.
Just want to take another look at you, Wayne.